Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, hopefully having an amazing day. A new PlayStation 5 Pro and Xbox Series console. Well, that's the rumour that's been swirling around the internet over the last day or so, and these could be 8K capable, at least according to TCL. Now, TCL, for those who don't know, is an actual TV brand. They're not as well known as, say, Samsung, but still they are, kind of well respected. And there was a press conference which was held in Poland, and then subsequently a Polish website, PPE, who took part of the press conference, took this photo, which you can see on screen. And I don't really need to read it to you guys, because I think the headlines pretty much speak for themselves, but let's just quickly go through it anyway. The release date is going to be 2023 or 2024. PS5 Pro or Xbox Series console, whatever it ends up being called. It's going to be rendering natively at 4K, at least according to what they're predicting, and outputting at, well, 8K. Curiously, they are stating that the target GPU performance here is an RX 7700 XT. Now, let's actually work backwards a little bit first, because I think this is imperative to realise. The 7700 XT, for those who don't follow the PC market, hasn't even been launched yet. It's based on AMD's new graphics IP, which is RDNA 3. According to my own information, and this is not just my info, but others are stating the same thing as well, the 7700 XT is allegedly going to be based on Navi 32, which is around 8,000 shaders. You can see them on screen yourself, 8,192. As for T-flops, well, it will depend on the clock frequency. For the desktop, we're expecting about 50 T-flops, FP32 performance. But, of course, in a console form factor, there would be some discrepancies anyway. Clock frequencies would adjust, numbers of shaders, and so on and so on. So this would be an absolute monumental upgrade over the base PlayStation 5. But I'm not particularly convinced that we're going to see that level of performance for a mid-gen upgrade, to be very honest with you. Now, so for those who have followed the channel for any length of time, you'll know that I've talked about the PS5 Pro according to my own sources numerous times, and I do believe that it is real, or at the very least Sony are working on a design which could possibly launch. Now, I know that sounds like a big caveat, but ultimately, designs are worked on all of the time and they're just not launched. A really good example is the Switch 4K. Nintendo just haven't launched anything. And I was one of the first who stated that the Switch Pro, Switch 4K, whatever it was being, kind of considered internally to be called, it was real. And I put out articles about it. I actually had it on the channel. And, I was like, well, maybe the info's wrong, but then it subsequently got proven to be correct because of the NVIDIA hack. For those who don't know, basically, NVIDIA were hacked and tons of information was leaked from NVIDIA, and there was basically evidence that the Switch Pro did exist. Now, to my understanding, for those who are asking, yeah, the Switch Pro, basically, it got into the hands of internal Nintendo developers, but then was pulled. And I don't know whether Nintendo have just decided to outright kill the project, or it's gone back to the drawing board to be upgraded, or tweaked, or changed, or there were problems with the hardware. It's very difficult to know with these things. But according to what I've heard about the PlayStation 5 Pro anyway, we're looking at about a 2 times increase in raster performance, and about a 2.5 times increase in ray tracing performance. Now, honestly, I do feel that those numbers are a little low, and it could be that those are initially decided upon targets, and Sony have decided since to go a little bit higher. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised if those numbers are a little low, because it's actually lower in performance compared to what we had with the, say, PS4 to PS4 Pro, which is around a 2.3 times increase, I can't remember exactly, in terms of FP32, or if you prefer T-flop performance. And of course, Microsoft really went just crazy with the Xbox One to Xbox One X by going up to 6 T-flops, which was, I mean, it wasn't just a huge increase over the, base Xbox console. It was like leaps, jumps, and then they flew. And of course, they also increased the efficiency of the architecture with numerous graphics IPs. And I'm not going to go too much into this because we've discussed it umpteen and one times previously. So personally speaking, I'm not too sure that these specifications are particularly 100% accurate. I feel that, you know, I do agree with them heavily that output resolution is a much bigger thing than the rendered input. So basically, we've seen Microsoft, of course, even Nintendo technically with the DLSS thing with the Switch Pro, but that hasn't launched. Sony, Nvidia, AMD, all of these companies, even Epic with Unreal Engine 5 has some form of upsampling. And this is done through different methods, whether it's temporal, whether it's through machine learning, whatever. And obviously, all of these different upsampling methods have one common denominator. You render with a lower resolution, and then you upsample. For example, with DLSS 2.x, you can upsample from, say, 1440p to 4K. And the same thing too with AMD's FSR2. Basically, you run at a lower resolution and then it's upscaled. Now, very interestingly, one of the sources who first told me that FSR2 was real, they even told me it was using spatial technology with no machine learning. So I was one of the first to report that. And that very same source told me that Sony were doubling down on some type of upsampling tech themselves. And I was told that it's not the same thing as FSR2. It was a different tech. I wasn't given specifics, but apparently it was something that they were actively researching. And one of the things that we've seen, of course, since then is Sony pushing things like ray tracing performance increases. But this does seem to be more cinematic, but ultimately this could also work for, you know, games as well. Basically, you're rendering the game, or scene, should I say, at lower resolutions with lower quality ray tracing, and then clever stuff is done in the background to make it better quality. So my personal feeling with these specifications from TCL is that they seem a little ambitious. 4K 120Hz as an output though, I would be 100% for, because it makes more logical sense. Like, you guys have seen that 4K screens now are becoming a lot more prolific on the market. And also there's the whole, you know, PlayStation VR 2. You can start to imagine how like premium VR experiences could be a really big thing. I also would like to just say that, you know, some people are asking me like, are we going to see major increases in the number of processor cores, for example? Are we going to see like something crazy like the new Xbox sport 32 cores? And the answer is probably not, guys. Like, ultimately, they could, you know, they could do a lot if they're willing to use the die space and, you know, crank the cost up. You know, anything is technically possible, providing you're willing to cool it, pay the price and all of that stuff. But it's not really something they're going to do with this upgrade. Assuming A, the upgrade ever launches, and B, my info is correct, I think it's basically going to be very similar, like an 8-core, 16-thread CPU with some gains in the architecture, some architectural improvements, because these consoles are basically using Zen 2 with some, you know, kind of tweaks, but ultimately Zen 2. So you can imagine Sony or Microsoft going in, using some improvements of some of the later Zen architectures, but basically tweaking it specifically for consoles and cranking the clock frequency up. Microsoft did exactly the same thing for the Xbox One X. With the Xbox One X, they took the Jaguar architecture, which was of course found in both the PS4 and Xbox One. They cranked the clock frequency to the stratosphere. I think it's like 2.3 gigahertz versus 1750 of the base console. And they also made numerous improvements as well to the efficiency. They were bundling in it's been quite a while, and this is off the top of my head, but they were doing things like bundling DirectX 12 instructions directly onto the GPU, which reduced the number of draw calls on the CPU or something like that, and that would basically reduce the CPU overhead, which made it a lot more efficient. They were doing all of this really cool stuff. So my personal takeaway is that I think these next consoles are going to be based, if Microsoft are launching one, if my information with the PlayStation 5 Pro is right, I think it's going to be more like pushes towards fast ray tracing, like improvements in ray tracing performance. We've already officially seen an AMD like patent from Sony. It's basically a ray tracing patent which was filed by Sony. I've gone more in depth in this in another video. And basically this ray tracing pattern is not RDNA 2. You can look yourselves, if you're technically inclined, Basically, you can just Google AMD's own ray tracing patent for RDNA 2. I can't remember when that got released publicly, but I think it was like 2019 or 2020. No, 2019. I can't remember. But you can just Google it and it will pop up. And you can compare that to the PlayStation 5 Pro patent, as I'm going to call it, Sony's patent, and you can see that there are a plethora of differences. Basically, it's much more efficient with how ray triangle intersection testing is performed. It is very possible that it's for a piece of hardware which never gets released. I don't just mean, you know, a console here. It could be a bloody smartwatch, I'm just saying. It could be, you know, Sony are working on a dishwasher that has ray tracing. Of course, I'm being a little silly, but you get my point. Like, just because a patent is a patent doesn't mean a patent becomes a product, and just because it's intended to become a product, it doesn't mean that it's necessary for that patent, because a patent can be implemented differently. But it does look like Sony are drastically increasing ray tracing performance of the PS5 Pro, and that patent got released after I was hearing that the performance targets of the PS5 Pro were at least 2.5 times increase in ray tracing performance over the base PS5. There is a lot more to say on this, honestly. I actually have a really lengthy video that I'm working on with tons of examples, but it's just not going to be ready today. I was actually working on the script anyway, coincidentally, when this dropped, and then, as I said, everyone was asking me to cover this, so I am, but there will be a much deeper investigation soon. And the last thing I'd like to discuss for today is actually just a quick update concerning Zen 4. I'd like to thank Dr. Ian Cuttress for a rather succinct overview of what Robert Hallock from AMD discussed over at PC World. I'll link the tweet from Ian in the video description. But you can see on screen yourself that concerning the demo of Zen 4 that was being used, 5.5 GHz, it was a reference MOBO from AMD, a 280mm AIO cooler. So this, just to be clear, is nothing extravagant with the cooling solution. It's not phase change, it's not, you know, something ridiculous. It's something that most people would have. I mean, ultimately, if you're buying a 16-core processor, you're not just going to run it with like a, you know, a cheap, crappy air cooler. You're going to really kind of go a premium cooling solution. The CPU is dated from April. It's a prototype. There was no overclocking involved. It's just the natural frequency of the CPU. Most threads were hitting around 5.5 GHz. It depends on the game/scene. For reference, the one that was being shown off was Ghostwire Tokyo. And according to Robert anyway, we're looking at 5.2 to 5.5 GHz across all threads on the specific game, which is actually really impressive. Further to this, Ian states that the CPU has 24 PCIe 5 lanes plus 4 for the chipset. There will be further chipset information later this year. Cheaper motherboards can be PCIe 4.0, and the 170 watt is PPT, not TDP. So, yeah, it's quite interesting, to be honest with you. I will also just add, and I would take this with a huge grain of salt, but I have actually heard that this processor can go higher. Up to 5.7 GHz is one frequency I've personally heard for lighter workloads. I don't think that's single core. I think it means like light game workloads. So I assume Ghostwire Tokyo. I know, again, they were demoing at 5.5 GHz, but this apparently is later quality silicon, and apparently it can go up to 5.7. I'm a little skeptical on that, to be honest, because it's so high in clock frequency. But who knows what they can do with like slightly improved quality silicon and other, you know, basically just final production quality. Maybe 5.7 is achievable, which would be absolutely just, I mean, that would be, I can't say anything other than bonkers, really. But that's about it for this video. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. Apologies for it being audio only. I wasn't actually intended to record today because I was working on another project, but here we are. If you've enjoyed it, you know what to do. Leave a likey on the video, and I will see you soon. Have an amazing day, guys. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.